Fast forward 289. Welcome back. I'm Larry. Tonight we're back on the 351 Cleveland again, so let's jump into it and get started. All right, so tonight what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pouring oil into the valley along with some zinc for the break-in period. And even though the cam's already broken, the lifter still got to break in and everything else got to seat. So I still use zinc, and then after that I'll probably use some diesel oil, 15W40 or something. But anyway, so we're going to do that. I'm leaving the intake off so I can watch and make sure everything's oiling like it's supposed to. I want to make sure oil's coming out of the rocker arms like it's supposed to. Watch the flow through the valley. So if you're going to do this with an engine, make sure you block off all your oil passages and where oil pressure will shoot out at. So on a Cleveland 400 and modified, you have this plug right here you need to put in, which they usually come in it from the factory, but make sure that plug's there. And then this is where an oil or another oil spot is. So I got my oil pressure gauge hooked up to it so I can see what kind of oil pressure I'm getting. Even though I'm only gonna be turning it with a drill, it'll still give me an idea of what the oil pressure should be. So that'll be kind of cool to see that. Craft FL18 oil filter, and what I'll do is I'll put this on there to do everything and check. That's another thing, you gotta make sure you obviously got an oil filter. And then to paint the engine, I will take this back off and just leave it full of oil and just put it back in the box, put it on the shelf, and keep it safe until I get the engine painted, then I could just put it back on. Some 10W30 Napa oil, standard, and then obviously some zinc plus additive to add to it. I'm going to put it on super tight, that way I don't mess the gasket up when I take it back off. Now we're just going to pour the oil in. Another thing is make sure that your drain plug is tight. And I actually meant to pour this in first, but that's all right. It'll be all right. All right, so we're going to use an extension with a 5/16 socket on it. That's what it is. That's what you need for a Cleveland 400 modified. We're going to put it on the oil pump drive. And I'm going to use my drill. And forward is turning a reverse clockwise position. So you want to spin the drill in reverse to the left. Oh yeah, and oil starting to spill over the heads, but we are getting good oil flow up out of the rocker arms, which is a good thing. That's what we're looking for. Now this pump is also primed now, so when it comes time to bump the key on this, it's just like you just shut the engine off. So you can see the oil pressure. I'll give you a nice front view of it. It's killing my batteries though, but see, just with a drill, we got 80 PSI, so that's good. And it's not even running yet, so that's great. You can see we got oil dripping off of every rocker arm. So that means we are getting oil from the push rod and bleeding down on every rocker arm. And we're good in the valley, so. And chamfering those oil drain holes will help out a lot with oil drain back, as well as what I did with that hole there. So that's great. So we're looking good. Now that that's done, we can put the intake on. Okay, so we're ready to install the valley pan gasket, which is what I went with. They got two versions of a gasket you can get for these engines. The first, of course, is like I said, the valley pan, just a piece of stamped sheet metal with ridges in it to seal. And even though this ain't the best kind, they also have just regular paper gaskets that would go up here as well. But I don't even know why they included this in the kit, because you don't need them. But I don't like those unless I'm running aluminum heads and aluminum intake. Then I would use that kind, because aluminum heads don't come with these pins to hold the valley pan down. See, the valley pan is made sitting here like this. And just like that, you set the intake down on it. But first, they include these rubber seals that go in here. I never use them. You put them on there, your intake will leak. So the best thing to do is to run a nice big thick bead of RTV along the line here, front and back. And I'm also going to run a small bead of RTV from this bolt hole downward to it on every corner. And the reason for that is, if you look at the way this valley pan is, so I'm going to put RTV on this too, but it's not really as important on this because all the oil is underneath the pan. But I'm going to put RTV here from right here over to help the intake push down on it harder. But anyway, the reason why is because you don't want oil leaking underneath the gasket, obviously, but you don't want it leaking out past this either as well. So that's why I would run a bead of RTV just from this bolt hole down underneath the pan on every corner, and then put the pan on, and then we'll run a bead from here all the way down to this crease on each side, and then put the intake on. You do that for the back and as well as the front. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Obviously, you want to make sure your surfaces are clean. I've wiped them down already and cleaned them, so we're good to go on that. Starting this corner of the head and where the block meet. You want to make your bead about as wide as this rail here. All right, so you can see this is about like the kind of bead you want. It might not be the prettiest bead, but that'll seal when we put that pan on there. I just had to kind of fill in a low spot I have right here. You see, you don't take much RTV. Now it's important, do not put RTV around these ports. These are your gas ports, and the gas, you put too much, the gas will wash that out, and then you're gonna have a mess, it'll start leaking. So just run ever so slightly a little bit of RTV down from that bolt hole on each side. And of course the front came out better, which is good because that'll be the one you'll see. You won't see the back one, but so that's good there. When it comes to the valley pan, they are marked front. See right there it says front, so that'll be toward the front of the engine, and they're metal, so you may have to flex yours to get it to fit. That's what I do to mine, because you got a bunch of lazy people now don't want to do their job and then just throw stuff anywhere and end up bending the box and ends up bending the gasket. So but you have to flex it out a little bit, or in I should say, and then once you torque it down, it'll actually set flat. We're just line up the notch on one side of that pin and push the gasket down in place. Once we do that, we can grab our RTV again. I said we're going to put just a bead right here real quick. It ain't got to be as big of a bead as what you put on the block. And I just follow this line right here. All right, now we can grab our intake. And I always put me 2 bolts in it to act as guide pins. And then once a couple threads are started, take and push the intake on down. Okay, so I don't know what happened. My camera died, or I forgot to hit the button, but we were having technical difficulties. So I didn't show the part of me torquing this down. So usually I don't torque intakes down with a torque spec. I just tighten them, when I'm using the paper gasket, because that's just the way I've always done it by feel, and I've never had one leak. But since this uses that metal valley pan, I actually did use a torque spec because it's basically bolting metal to metal. So I use the torque spec for it, and the pattern that I did is like always, I start in the middle. This is just for demonstration purposes, obviously, but I start in the middle, work my way out in a crisscross pattern. So if I do this one, then I would do the opposite of here, then come back to this one and that one, and just keep doing that back and forth like that, and that's the way you want to go about doing all of this, just like that, and that kind of pattern, that switching back and forth, crisscross pattern, X pattern, working your way from the middle out. And if I come over here to the book, again, 72-351 Cleveland, 400. Come on over, and we have intake manifold is 8. So come down here and look at 8. And you have the different sizes here. So because there's 2 different sizes used on the intake. So now what I did is, this one here, the way this is because I looked at 72-351 Cleveland 400 and 73 Cleveland modified 400. And it's got an 8 or it's got a 10 for that one. So I just combined the 2 technically. So like the main bolts, or most of the bolts, just 3/8, 27 to 23 foot-pounds. You come over to the 10 3/8 is 22 to 32. And then for the 5/16, they're the same for both. So yeah, I went 25 because 25 is the max for them. Yes, I just torqued all of them at 25. So there's the torque specs on that. Okay, so with that being done now, the intake is actually bolted on. It is done. Now the next step is to go through and prep the block. Well, we got to actually install the restrictor plate and the thermostat and housing onto the block, and then we will be able to start prepping the block for paint. So that'll be the next step. Alrighty guys, well that's done. I'm happy to have that done. We're one step closer now, so stay tuned for the next video where we actually we're going to install that thermostat housing. So that's all there is for this video. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. I'd appreciate that as well. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the drop box down below. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.